What if I told you that the father of psychoanalysis conducted séances in his spare time? That Carl Jung believed he could speak to the dead and saw ghosts in his own home? The two men who shaped how we understand the human mind today weren't just scientists. They were practitioners of the occult. Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung didn't just study the unconscious mind. They explored realms that most academics won't even whisper about. Secret societies, mystical rituals, and supernatural encounters weren't just curiosities to these men. They were fundamental to their revolutionary theories about human consciousness. Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on psychology's hidden history. You're about to discover how ancient occult practices became the foundation of modern therapy, how séances influenced psychoanalysis, how mystical visions shaped our understanding of dreams and the unconscious. The truth about psychology's origins will change everything you thought you knew about the human mind. Part 1. The Mirror Séance Method. Hidden in Freud's private study were dozens of ancient mirrors from around the world. But these weren't decorations. They were tools for something far more mysterious than anyone realized. While the world knew Freud as the serious scientist who mapped the human psyche, behind closed doors he was conducting rituals that would shock his colleagues. Freud discovered that mirrors during séances created what he called windows into the unconscious mind. The reflections didn't just show his physical appearance, they revealed hidden aspects of his personality that normal introspection couldn't reach. This wasn't superstition. This was systematic self-analysis using techniques borrowed from ancient mystical traditions. Here's the first occult-rooted technique you can use today. Freud's mirror séance method unlocks parts of your mind that regular thinking keeps buried. When you sit with a mirror in dim light and ask your reflection direct questions about your fears or desires, something extraordinary happens. Your unconscious mind begins speaking through micro-expressions and subtle changes you've never noticed before. This technique reveals truths about yourself that years of therapy might never uncover. The same method Freud used to develop his groundbreaking theories about repression and the unconscious is available to you right now. Part 2. Jung's Shadow Dialogue Practice. Carl Jung kept a leather-bound journal that contained conversations with someone who never existed. Or did they? Jung spent hours writing elaborate dialogues with what he called his shadow self. But this wasn't creative writing. This was a psychological technique he borrowed directly from medieval alchemists who believed you could literally speak with different aspects of your soul. The alchemists taught that every person contained opposing forces that needed to be balanced through ritual dialogue. Jung took this ancient practice and discovered it was the key to psychological integration. Instead of fighting against your darker impulses, you could actually have conversations with them. This brings us to the second technique rooted in occult tradition. Jung's shadow dialogue practice transforms your relationship with the parts of yourself you've been taught to hide. Every night, Jung would write questions to his shadow and then let his shadow write back. These weren't imaginary conversations. They were direct communications with his unconscious mind. When you start having real conversations with your shadow self, you stop being at war with your own nature. Your anger, jealousy, and selfish desires become allies instead of enemies. Jung discovered that suppressing these aspects of yourself creates mental illness, while integrating them creates wholeness. This ancient alchemical practice became the foundation of modern depth psychology. Part 3. The Collective Unconscious Tap. Jung believed human beings shared a mystical connection through what he called the collective unconscious, but where did this revolutionary idea even come from? Ancient divination practices. For thousands of years, shamans and mystics claimed they could tap into ancestral wisdom by entering altered states of consciousness. Jung didn't just dismiss this as primitive superstition, he actually studied it. He discovered that when people accessed deep meditative states, they often received insights that seemed to come from beyond their personal experience. And these weren't just hallucinations. They were connections to patterns of human experience that transcended individual knowledge. The same techniques used by ancient oracles could actually be adapted for modern psychological insight. So, here's the third occult-derived method for transforming your life. Jung's collective unconscious tap gives you access to solutions your logical mind could never generate. When you're facing difficult decisions, you can use Jung's adaptation of ancient divination techniques to access collective human wisdom. The process involves entering a meditative state while focusing on your specific problem, then allowing images and insights to emerge without forcing them. Jung found that people consistently received guidance that proved remarkably accurate and helpful. This isn't mystical nonsense. This is tapping into the accumulated wisdom of human experience stored in your unconscious mind. Part 4. Freudian Dream Alchemy. Every night, Freud recorded his dreams in exhaustive detail. But he wasn't just analyzing them psychologically. He was applying principles borrowed directly from medieval alchemy. The alchemists believed that base metals could be transformed into gold through specific processes. Freud realized the same transformation principles could turn disturbing dreams into psychological gold. Alchemical texts describe stages of transformation that Freud recognized in dream analysis. What seemed like meaningless or frightening dream imagery actually contained valuable insights about repressed desires and hidden motivations. But you had to know the alchemical process to extract the psychological gold. This leads us to the fourth technique with occult origins. Freudian dream alchemy transforms your worst nightmares into your most powerful insights. Instead of just dismissing disturbing dreams, you can use Freud's alchemical approach to decode what your unconscious mind is trying to communicate. When you apply alchemical transformation principles to dream analysis, recurring nightmares stop being sources of anxiety and become sources of self-knowledge. The fears and conflicts that haunt your sleep actually contain the exact information you need to resolve psychological problems in your waking life. Freud discovered that dreams weren't just random neural activity. They were alchemical laboratories where your unconscious mind transformed psychological conflicts into symbolic wisdom. This ancient practice actually became the foundation of modern dream interpretation. Part 5. The Persona Ritual. Jung owned an extensive collection of tribal masks from cultures around the world. But these weren't just art pieces. They were tools for a psychological technique he adapted from shamanic practices. Jung discovered that different masks allowed him to access different aspects of his personality that social conditioning had buried. Shamanic traditions taught that humans wore invisible masks in daily life, but most people became trapped by these false identities. Through ritual mask work, shamans could help people remove false personas and discover their authentic selves. Jung realized this ancient practice was the key to psychological authenticity. So here's the fifth occult-rooted technique for authentic living. Jung's persona ritual helps you identify and shed the false personalities that society has imposed on you. By consciously exploring different personas, you discover which aspects of your identity are genuinely yours and which are just performance. Jung would spend hours wearing different masks while journaling about the thoughts and feelings each persona evoked. This wasn't just role-playing. This was systematic exploration of the multiple selves that exist within every human being. When you practice Jung's persona ritual, you stop living according to other people's expectations and start living from your authentic core. The masks reveal what you've been hiding from yourself and show you who you really are beneath social conditioning. He regularly entered trance-like states where he would meet and converse with mysterious figures from his unconscious mind. He called this active imagination, but the technique came directly from occult practices used by mystics for centuries. These weren't hallucinations or fantasies. Jung discovered these inner figures contained genuine wisdom about solving life's challenges. Occult traditions taught that trained practitioners could access archetypal guides through visualization and dialogue. Jung adapted these techniques for psychological healing and found they were remarkably effective. The figures that emerged during active imagination sessions provided insights that Jung's conscious mind couldn't generate. This brings us to the sixth technique rooted in forbidden practices. Jung's occult active imagination gives you access to inner wisdom that can solve your most complex problems. By entering controlled trance states and dialoguing with archetypal figures, you tap into intelligence that transcends your normal thinking. The technique involves relaxing into a meditative state and allowing symbolic figures to emerge in your mind's eye. Instead of dismissing these as imagination, you engage them in conversation about your challenges. Jung found that these inner guides consistently provided practical solutions and profound insights. This occult-derived practice became one of Jung's most powerful therapeutic tools and remains hidden from mainstream psychology today. Both Freud and Jung made a shocking discovery about human relationships. People unconsciously cast what they called psychological spells on each other by projecting unresolved emotions onto those around them. This wasn't metaphorical language. They believed these projections created genuine energetic effects that influence behavior and emotions. Occult traditions had long recognized that unresolved emotions could become psychic attachments that affected other people. Freud and Jung realized this was the mechanism behind what they called transference in therapy. Patients didn't just transfer feelings onto their therapists. They were unconsciously transmitting emotional energy. Here's the seventh technique derived from occult understanding. Breaking transference spells frees you from unconscious emotional patterns that sabotage your relationships. When you recognize that you're projecting unresolved issues onto others, you can consciously withdraw these psychological projections. The process involves identifying when you're having disproportionate emotional reactions to people and recognizing these as projections of your own unresolved conflicts. Instead of blaming others for triggering you, you reclaim the projected emotions and work with them directly. Freud and Jung discovered that most relationship problems stem from these unconscious emotional projections. When you stop casting transference spells, your relationships become authentic connections rather than psychological battlegrounds where you fight your own unresolved issues. The final secret that Freud and Jung discovered came from ancient traditions of treating illness as sacred communication. Instead of seeing anxiety, depression, and other psychological symptoms as problems to eliminate, they learned to read them as messages from the unconscious mind. This approach came directly from shamanic practices of treating symptoms as spiritual guidance. Ancient healers believed that mental distress contained important information about what needed to change in a person's life. Freud and Jung realized that psychological symptoms weren't random malfunctions. They were the unconscious mind's way of communicating about unresolved conflicts and unmet needs. This brings us to the eighth and final occult-rooted technique. Sacred symptom reading transforms your relationship with mental distress by treating your symptoms as messengers rather than enemies. Instead of just medicating anxiety or depression, you can decode what these experiences are trying to tell you. When you approach psychological symptoms as communications from your unconscious mind, they become guides toward healing rather than sources of suffering. Your anxiety might be warning you about situations that violate your authentic values. Your depression might be signaling that your current life path isn't aligned with your true nature. Freud and Jung discovered that symptoms often disappear when you understand and address the underlying messages they carry. These 8 techniques reveal the hidden truth about modern psychology. What we call scientific therapy actually emerged from ancient occult practices that Freud and Jung secretly studied and adapted. The unconscious mind, dream analysis, shadow work, and archetypal psychology all have roots in mystical traditions that mainstream academia refuses to acknowledge. The founders of psychology weren't just scientists. They were modern practitioners of ancient wisdom who disguised occult techniques as medical treatments. Now you have access to the same practices that revolutionized our understanding of human consciousness. The question isn't whether these techniques work. The question is whether you're ready to use them.